The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as Admiral James Wilson stood motionless before a white marble headstone. His weathered face, carved by 30 years of combat and command, revealed nothing, but his eyes held the weight of memories no man should carry. A cold wind swept through the oaks as he placed a single coin atop the marker. The silent tribute of a warrior to a fallen brother. David Morgan, United States Army, Operation Enduring Freedom. 2011. Wilson's mind drifted to Afghanistan's Korangal Valley, where Morgan had saved his team at the cost of his own life. The silver star on Wilson's chest should have been Morgan's. He'd hate all this ceremony, came a graveled voice from behind. Wilson didn't turn. After decades in special operations, he could identify Robert Bennett by sound alone. The footsteps of the 72-year-old retired colonel had a distinctive rhythm, slightly uneven from an old combat wound, but measured with the precision of a man who had once been America's deadliest sniper. He would, Wilson agreed, finally facing his old rival. But he deserved better than what he got. Bennett's weathered face had aged into something resembling carved granite, deep-set eyes unnervingly alert beneath silver brows. The two men stood in silence, united momentarily by respect despite a history of bitter disagreements stretching back to Desert Storm. "They're waiting at the Pentagon," Bennett said finally. "Secretary wants to brief personally." Wilson's jaw tightened. "Project Artemis." "Yes, the Female Integration Initiative." "Integration," Wilson repeated, the word sharp with contempt. "Politicians playing social experiments with the most elite fighting force in the world." Bennett studied him, then glanced back at Morgan's headstone. "Times change, Jim." "Some things shouldn't." The Pentagon's briefing room fell silent as Wilson entered. 8 senior officers sat around a polished oak table, each with personnel files open before them. On the wall-mounted screen glowed the words, "Project Artemis Integration Initiative." "Gentlemen," Wilson began, taking a seat, "I understand we're making history. Let's make sure it's the right kind." Captain Harris, the youngest officer present, cleared his throat. "Sir, we've selected 5 female candidates from various service branches. All have exceptional physical metrics and psychological profiles." Wilson's expression remained impassive. "And their combat experience?" Harris hesitated. "Limited, sir. 2 have served in support roles in Afghanistan. The others have no direct combat experience," Wilson finished. "Yet we're considering them for the most elite combat unit in the military." The door swung open. Secretary of Defense Williams entered with Bennett, following close behind. Career officers straightened imperceptibly in the presence of civilian authority. "Admiral Wilson," the secretary nodded, "I believe you've reviewed the preliminary files." "I have, Mr. Secretary, and I maintain my objections." Williams smiled thinly. "Duly noted. Colonel Bennett will be joining as special consultant." The tension thickened. Wilson's history with Bennett was well known throughout special operations circles, a tactical disagreement during the Gulf War that had escalated into a legendary confrontation. "We were discussing the combat readiness of female candidates," Wilson said, tone neutral but cold. Bennett nodded, opening a file. "I've reviewed their qualifications. Impressive. Particularly Morgan." Wilson turned to his dossier. "Olivia Morgan, 28, Army Staff Sergeant. Marksmanship instructor at Fort Benning." His eyes narrowed. "No combat deployments." "Her father was David Morgan," Bennett said quietly. The name hung in the air. Wilson looked up sharply, reassessing the file with sudden interest. "Lieutenant Colonel Morgan's daughter," he said, understanding dawning. "I didn't make the connection." "She grew up on his ranch in Montana," Bennett continued. "David taught her to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. She's won 3 national civilian long-range shooting competitions, her last win at 1,500 yards with a 5-inch grouping." Wilson's eyes met Bennett's. "Civilian competition is not combat." "No," Bennett agreed, "but talent is talent." When the meeting adjourned and the other officers filed out, Wilson confronted Bennett directly. "You recommended her specifically, didn't you?" Bennett gathered his papers unhurriedly. "I might have mentioned her name to some people, Why? What's your stake in this? Bennett paused, his eyes meeting Wilson's directly. David Morgan was more than a fellow operator to me, Jim. He saved my life in Basra in '91, pulled me out of a collapsed building while under heavy fire. And now you feel you owe his daughter something. I owe him everything, Bennett said simply. But that's not why I recommended Olivia. I did it because she's exceptional. Wilson shook his head. This isn't about opportunities or fairness, Bob. This is about combat effectiveness, about the lives of the men these women will serve with. I remember people saying similar things when they integrated the regular forces, Bennett countered. Each time the argument was the same. It will undermine unit cohesion, reduce combat effectiveness, put lives at risk. This is different. Is it? Or are we just as blind to our own prejudices as our predecessors were to theirs? Before Wilson could respond, Bennett turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. One more thing. She doesn't want to be a pioneer or break barriers. She wants to be a SEAL, because her father told her it was the pinnacle of warrior excellence, and she believes she belongs there. The morning air at Coronado hung heavy with humidity as the new candidates assembled on the parade ground. 20 men and 1 woman stood in formation, faces expressionless, despite sweat already beginning to soak through their uniforms. Olivia Morgan stood at the end of the line, auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, green eyes focused on a point in the middle distance. At 5'8", she was shorter than most of the men but carried herself with quiet confidence that drew occasional sidelong glances. From his position on the observation platform, Wilson studied her through binoculars. Her personnel file indicated she could run 2 miles in under 13 minutes and perform 23 pull-ups, numbers that would place her in the top quartile even among male candidates. Thinking about sending her home already? Bennett's voice came from behind, tinged with dry amusement. Wilson lowered the binoculars. Just assessing all the candidates, that's my job. Bennett moved beside him. The tall one at the front, Scott Reynolds, former Army Ranger. 2 tours in Afghanistan, Silver Star recipient. He'll be one to watch. I've read his file, Wilson replied. Impressive combat record, leadership qualities. He's exactly the kind of operator we look for. And the exact opposite of Morgan in every way, Bennett observed. Born with every advantage from a military family going back 4 generations. West Point graduate. The kind of soldier who gets promoted because he looks the part as much as because he earns it. Below them, Master Chief Peterson had begun addressing the candidates. 90% would not complete the training. Those who failed would return to their units with no shame. Those who succeeded would join the most elite fighting force on Earth. As Peterson spoke, Reynolds turned slightly to glance at Morgan. The expression was brief but unmistakable, a mixture of skepticism and dismissal. It's starting already, Bennett said quietly. It's not personal, Wilson countered. It's tribal. These men have been conditioned to view themselves as part of a warrior brotherhood. She represents a disruption to that identity. And you think that justifies it? I didn't say that. I'm explaining the reality she'll face. If she can't handle skeptical looks, she won't last a day in actual training. The initial assessment began immediately, a series of physical tests to establish baselines. The first event was a 5-mile run in full uniform and boots. Reynolds took the lead, setting a punishing pace. Morgan positioned herself in the middle of the field, maintaining a steady rhythm that seemed almost mechanical in its consistency. While others showed signs of fatigue by the 3rd mile, her pace remained unchanged. She's holding back, Bennett observed. Wilson nodded reluctantly. Saving energy. Smart. By the final mile, Reynolds had extended his lead, but several who had tried to match his initial pace were struggling. As they approached the finish line, Morgan accelerated smoothly, passing 4 faltering candidates to finish 7th overall. When she caught Reynolds looking, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement, not friendly, but respectful. The next event took place at the shooting range. Each candidate was given a standard-issue M4 carbine and directed to engage targets at various distances under time constraints. When Morgan's turn came, Wilson found himself watching intently. She approached the firing line with practiced ease, checking the weapon with quick, efficient movements. Her preparation was methodical, almost meditative. When the command to fire was given, her transformation was immediate. Each shot came in a smooth, controlled rhythm, her body barely moving between rounds. When she finished, the result was unmistakable. 50 hits out of 50, with groupings tighter than any previous candidate. Beginner's luck, Wilson muttered. Bennett chuckled softly. David Morgan had a shooting range on his property. Olivia has probably fired more rounds by age 28 than most military snipers do in their entire careers. Later that evening, Wilson spotted a solitary figure on the shooting range. The facility was supposed to be closed, but someone had bypassed the schedule. In the dim light, Olivia Morgan was methodically firing a pistol at a target 25 yards away. Her form was flawless, her concentration absolute. Wilson watched for several minutes before making his presence known. "Training hours are over, Sergeant Morgan." She turned, startled, and immediately stood at attention. "Admiral Wilson. I apologize, sir. I should have requested permission." He examined the target, 15 holes, all within a 2-inch circle. "Couldn't sleep?" "No excuse, sir." "That wasn't a reprimand, Morgan. It was a question." She hesitated. "I always shoot before sleeping, sir. Helps clear my mind." Wilson studied her face in the dim light. Despite the long day of physical exertion, she showed no signs of exhaustion. "Your father taught you that?" A flicker of surprise crossed her features. "Yes, sir. You knew my father?" "I knew of him. His reputation. He was highly respected." Wilson shifted, his voice becoming more direct. "Why are you here, Morgan? And I don't mean on this range after hours. I mean in this program. You must know the odds are stacked against you." She considered the question carefully. "With respect, sir, I'm not interested in odds. I'm interested in becoming the best operator I can be. My father always said the SEALs were the pinnacle of special operations. That's where I belong." "Your father said that despite never being a SEAL himself." "He said it because he fought alongside them, sir. He saw what they could do." Wilson nodded slowly. "Clean up here and get some rest. Morgan, tomorrow will be harder than today." "Yes, sir." As she began breaking down the pistol, Wilson paused. "Your shooting is impressive, but this program will test a lot more than marksmanship." "I understand that, sir." "Do you? Because I'm not sure you grasp what's coming. The real challenge is psychological. The isolation, the constant pressure, the knowledge that every man around you is waiting for you to fail." Morgan met his gaze directly. "With respect, Admiral, I've been dealing with that my entire life. Men waiting for me to fail isn't new. It's just Tuesday." Despite himself, Wilson felt the corner of his mouth twitch. In the officer's mess later that night, Wilson found Bennett waiting with 2 glasses of bourbon. "She's good," Wilson admitted. "Better than good with a firearm. Physically capable, mentally tough, at least on the surface. But you're still not convinced." "This is day 1, Bob. The real tests haven't even begun." Bennett leaned forward, his expression suddenly intense. "There's something you should know about Olivia Morgan. Something that isn't in her file." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I wasn't completely honest about how I know her. After David was killed, I visited the family ranch. Olivia was 24, already enlisted. I found her on their private range, shooting her father's long rifles. She was hitting targets at 1,000 yards with consistency that would have impressed any SEAL sniper. Natural talent. More than that, she had the same qualities I recognized in the best operators I've known: focus, discipline, and that rare ability to remain calm under pressure." Bennett's eyes grew distant. "I made her father a promise in Desert Storm. I told him if he ever needed anything, I would be there. When he was killed, I felt like I'd failed him." "So this is about repaying a debt," Wilson said, understanding dawning. "It started that way," Bennett admitted. "But after seeing what she's capable of, it's become something more. She deserves this chance, Jim. Not because of who her father was, but because of who she is." Wilson stared into his bourbon. "I appreciate you telling me this, but it doesn't change my responsibility to maintain the standards of this program. I'm not asking you to lower any standards for her, just to judge her on her merits, not your preconceptions. Before Wilson could respond, his secure phone vibrated. The caller ID showed Pentagon Command Center. His expression darkened as he answered, listening intently before responding. Understood. Secure briefing in 1 hour. He ended the call, meeting Bennett's questioning gaze. Operations gone sideways in Syria. 4 CIA operatives taken hostage. His eyes narrowed. And apparently it has something to do with Project Artemis. The secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon hummed with tension. Digital displays showed satellite imagery of a compound near the Syrian-Iraqi border, a collection of buildings surrounded by walls patrolled by armed guards. Project Artemis was always more than integration, Admiral, Secretary Williams explained. Female operators can access environments and intelligence that men simply cannot in certain parts of the world. So you've been running a parallel program. Wilson's voice was dangerously quiet. 18 months of specialized training for female operatives, using my SEAL program as cover for their final assessment. CIA Deputy Director Patricia Langley leaned forward. Need to know, Admiral. Your program provided excellent cover for Sergeant Morgan's final evaluation phase. Wilson's jaw clenched. My program is not a cover for anything, Director Langley. It exists to identify and train the most elite warriors this country produces. It is not a playground for intelligence experiments. Bennett, who had been silent until now, spoke up. What exactly happened in Syria? Langley tapped commands into her tablet. The display changed to show 4 photographs, 3 men and 1 woman, all in civilian clothes. These officers were gathering intelligence on weapons movements when they were captured 3 days ago. Intelligence suggests they'll be moved within 72 hours. Once that happens, extraction becomes nearly impossible. With respect, Wilson countered, this appears to be a straightforward hostage rescue. JSOC has multiple teams trained specifically for this scenario. General Harris leaned forward. The situation is complicated by civilians in the compound. Many are women and children. A conventional assault would result in significant collateral damage. The secretary activated another display showing a tactical insertion plan. We believe there's a window in 48 hours. A religious festival in the nearby village will draw many guards away. Wilson immediately spotted the critical flaw. This plan requires a precision shooter positioned here, he said, pointing to a rocky outcropping overlooking the compound. That position is nearly 2 kilometers from the target. Even our best snipers would find that challenging. Which is why we need Morgan, Bennett spoke up. Her marksmanship scores in the preparatory program were off the charts. Wilson turned to Bennett, expression hardening. So you did know about this? Bennett shook his head firmly. Not until 12 hours ago when they brought me here. I recommended Olivia for the SEAL program because of her abilities, not for some covert operation. Morgan has been part of a specialized training program run jointly by CIA and JSOC, Langley explained. The program identifies and develops female operators capable of performing in situations where male operators would be at a disadvantage. Wilson leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Secretary, I understand your authority, but I will not risk the life of an untrained operator, regardless of her shooting skills, on a mission this complex. She hasn't completed BUD-S, she hasn't gone through Hell Week, she hasn't faced real combat. Actually, she has, Langley interjected. The preparatory program included multiple live-fire exercises and simulated combat scenarios. Her performance was exceptional. The secretary stood, signaling the end of discussion. Admiral, this operation has been approved at the highest levels. Morgan will be deployed with or without your endorsement. Wilson remained seated, his expression unreadable. And if I refuse? Then you would be removed from command of the training program, effective immediately. After a long moment, Wilson stood. Mr. Secretary, I took an oath to defend this country and to protect the men and women under my command. That includes Morgan. If this operation proceeds, I want full tactical oversight and personally oversee her final preparation. The secretary nodded slowly. Acceptable. One more condition, Bennett accompanies her as an advisor. Agree, the secretary said. You have 36 hours, Admiral. Make them count. Dawn was breaking over Coronado as Olivia Morgan completed her fifth lap around the training ground. Unlike the previous day, when she had deliberately held back during the group run, this morning she pushed herself to her limits while the base still slept. From the shadows, Wilson and Bennett watched in silence, having returned from Washington just 2 hours earlier. She doesn't know we're back yet, Bennett observed. Wilson checked his watch. 8:05:30. Training doesn't begin for another hour. She's pushing herself without supervision. David was the same way, Bennett said. Always first up, last to rest. An hour later, Morgan sat ramrod straight in Wilson's office as he laid out the situation in clear, unvarnished terms. "Let me be certain I understand," Morgan said when Wilson finished. "For the past 18 months, I've been unknowingly assessed as part of a classified program. My transfer to Bud-S training was arranged as cover for final evaluation, and now I'm being deployed on a hostage extraction mission in Syria." "That's correct, Sergeant," Wilson confirmed. Morgan absorbed this, her green eyes revealing nothing. "Why me specifically? Why was I selected without my knowledge or consent?" Wilson glanced at Bennett, who stepped forward. "Your shooting scores initially flagged you for consideration. The Army's marksmanship trials at Fort Benning. You outshot instructors with decades of experience. There are better shooters in the military," Morgan countered. "Established snipers with combat experience. None of them are women," Wilson said bluntly. "And this mission specifically requires a female operator." Morgan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "So, despite all the talk about standards and combat readiness, this is ultimately about my gender." The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Wilson found himself unexpectedly sympathetic. "The reality of modern warfare sometimes requires specialized assets," he said carefully. Morgan nodded slowly. "When do I leave?" Wilson exchanged glances with Bennett. "You're accepting the mission?" "4 Americans are being held hostage, sir. Their lives are at risk. What else would I do?" "I need to be absolutely clear about something," Wilson said. "This mission is volunteer only. If you have any reservations whatsoever, now is the time to express them." Morgan met his gaze directly. "My only reservation, sir, is that I haven't completed Bud-S training. I don't want special treatment or exceptions." "This isn't special treatment," Bennett interjected. "It's an emergency deployment based on specific mission requirements. Many operators have been deployed under similar circumstances." "Will I be able to return to training afterward?" Morgan asked. "Assuming I survive." "That will depend on the outcome," Wilson answered honestly. "But I'll do everything in my power to ensure you receive a fair opportunity to complete the program on its merits." Morgan nodded once. "Then I accept the mission, sir." Training Room 3 had been transformed into a detailed mission planning center. Captain Miller of Delta Force, a compact, muscular man with a trimmed beard, was reviewing intelligence reports when Morgan arrived. Over the next 12 hours, Morgan was immersed in intensive mission preparation. The plan called for her to establish a sniper position on a ridge overlooking the compound, providing overwatch for Miller's 6-man team as they infiltrated to extract the hostages. As evening approached, Wilson observed a practical shooting exercise. Bennett had set up targets at varying distances from 800 to 1,400 meters. Morgan lay prone behind a Macmillan TAC-50 sniper rifle, her body perfectly still as she acquired each target. "Wind from the southeast, 8 knots, Bennett called out. "Temperature dropping 5 degrees, barometric pressure falling." Morgan made minute adjustments without comment. Her first shot rang out, finding the center of a target nearly a mile away. 5 more followed in methodical succession, each striking within inches of its intended point, despite the changing conditions. Captain Miller, watching from beside Wilson, gave a low whistle. "That's impressive, Admiral. Most of my team's designated marksmen would struggle with those shots." "She's good," Wilson acknowledged. "But shooting paper targets is different from taking lives in a combat zone. Has she ever killed before?" "No," Bennett admitted. "She's ready from a technical standpoint. Her fundamentals are flawless, but the psychological aspect of taking human life isn't something we can fully prepare her for." "We need to know before she deploys," Wilson insisted. "Is there any way to create a more realistic simulation?" 4 hours later, Morgan stood in full tactical gear at the entrance to the Kill House, a facility designed to train operators in close-quarters battle under realistic conditions. The structure was configured to mimic the target compound. The exercise began with Morgan taking position on an elevated platform overlooking the main courtyard. For 15 minutes, the operation proceeded according to plan. Then, deliberately, the scenario changed. Additional role players emerged, creating a situation far more complex than briefed. Miller's team found themselves pinned down in the central courtyard, surrounded on 3 sides. Overwatch, we're compromised, Miller's voice crackled through her radio. Multiple hostiles, north and east entrances. We need immediate support. Through her scope, Morgan saw the situation deteriorating rapidly. 6 hostile role players had appeared simultaneously, each positioned to fire on Miller's exposed team. In the control room, Wilson leaned forward intently. "This is it," he murmured. "The moment of truth." Time seemed to slow as Morgan assessed the threat pattern. Her breathing remained controlled, her focus absolute. Then, in a display of marksmanship that left even veteran observers stunned, she engaged all 6 targets in rapid succession. 6 shots delivered within a 3-second window, each finding its mark with surgical precision. When the exercise concluded, Wilson studied her before speaking. "Your technical performance was exceptional, but I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. When you engaged those 6 targets, what were you thinking?" Morgan considered carefully. "I wasn't thinking, sir. Not consciously. Training took over. I identified the threats, established priority, and engaged in the most efficient sequence possible. Were you aware they represented human beings? That in the actual mission, you'd be taking lives?" A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, sir, I was aware." "And that awareness didn't cause you to hesitate?" "No, sir. Because I was also aware that if I didn't act immediately, Captain Miller's team would be killed. In that moment, their lives took priority." Wilson exchanged glances with Bennett, who gave a slight nod of approval. "One final question. After completing those shots, how did you feel?" Morgan met his gaze directly. "I didn't feel anything during the engagement, sir. Afterward, I felt relief that the team was safe." She paused. "My father once told me that anyone who isn't troubled by taking human life isn't someone who should be given that responsibility. I expect it will affect me, but not until after the mission is complete. Not while lives depend on my focus." Her answer, delivered with quiet conviction, seemed to satisfy Wilson. "Sergeant Morgan, based on your performance and our assessment, I'm approving your deployment." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me, Morgan," Wilson said grimly. "This mission carries substantial risk, and I'm sending you into harm's way without the full training I believe you deserve. That's not something I take lightly." "I understand, sir. I won't let you down." The night before deployment brought unexpected visitors. As Morgan methodically prepared her equipment, the door opened to reveal Scott Reynolds and 2 other candidates. "Morgan," Reynolds acknowledged, his usual bravado subdued. "Heard you're shipping out." She looked up, surprised. "Where did you hear that?" "Base is buzzing with rumors. Special deployment, high priority." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "We just wanted to say be careful out there." The gesture caught Morgan off guard. These same men had been betting on her failure days earlier. "Thanks," she said simply. "I appreciate it." At Oro 100, 2 hours before scheduled departure, Bennett knocked softly at her door. "Got a minute?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, worn smooth by years of handling. "I wanted to give you this before you leave. It belonged to your father." Morgan opened it carefully to reveal a tarnished brass compass. The glass was scratched, and the metal had developed a patina that spoke of years in the field. He carried that compass on every operation, said it always pointed him toward home, no matter how far away he might be. Bennett fixed her with an intense gaze. "There's something else I need to tell you, Emma. Something about this mission." The use of her first name alerted Morgan that whatever followed would be deeply personal. "I recommended you for this program," Bennett admitted. "Not the classified part. I knew nothing about Project Artemis until recently. but I've been watching your career for years, waiting for the right opportunity. Because of my father, Morgan said, understanding dawning. Initially, yes, Bennett acknowledged. But the more I learned about you, your skills, your determination, your character, the more I recognized that you deserve this opportunity regardless of who your father was. Bennett rose to leave, then handed her a sealed envelope. One more thing. Open this after the mission, not before. As Bennett reached the door, she called after him. Sir, one question. If my father hadn't saved your life, would you still have recommended me? Bennett considered carefully. I believe I would have. Talent like yours is rare. It deserves to be recognized regardless of circumstances. Two Black Hawk helicopters waited on the tarmac, rotors motionless in the pre-dawn darkness. Admiral Wilson approached Morgan, who stood adjusting the specialized Macmillan TAC-50 sniper rifle issued for the operation. Final checks complete? Morgan nodded. Yes, sir. Wilson's expression grew serious. I've reviewed the latest intelligence. Wind speeds at the target location have increased, 15 to 20 knots, gusting to 25. Morgan processed this information quickly. That will affect long-range shooting considerably. Has the mission plan been adjusted? Captain Miller believes the operation remains viable, but the margin for error is reduced. The decision to proceed is yours, Sergeant. Morgan considered carefully. The winds would make the already challenging shots significantly more difficult. But the alternative was aborting the mission, leaving 4 Americans in enemy hands with time running out. I can compensate for the wind, sir. The mission should proceed as planned. Bennett approached carrying a small case. Last-minute addition. He opened it to reveal a specialized spotting scope. Latest generation with enhanced low-light capability and built-in atmospheric sensors. Godspeed, Sergeant, Wilson said formally. Complete your mission and come home safely. That's an order. Yes, sir, Morgan replied, snapping a crisp salute that both men returned. As she walked toward the waiting helicopter, Bennett called after her. Trust your training, Emma, and when the moment comes, take the shot. Dawn was breaking when the helicopter touched down in northern Iraq. The team disembarked swiftly, moving toward a ridgeline that would provide cover during their approach to the target area. No words were exchanged as they moved. The 6 Delta operators moved like ghosts, their bodies instinctively finding natural concealment. Morgan matched their pace and discipline. Miller gathered the team in a tight circle, his voice barely audible. Religious festival begins at 1300 hours, which should draw approximately 40% of guards away. He turned to Morgan. Overwatch, your position is here. Distance to the farthest target will be approximately 800 meters. Morgan absorbed this information with outward calm. Though inwardly she noted that 800 meters exceeded the range estimates they had discussed during planning. Miller approached and led her to a position slightly removed from the rest of the team. My team knows what happened at Coronado. The kill house exercise. 6 targets in 3 seconds. They know you're good, but they also know you've never been in combat. Morgan met his gaze steadily. You're concerned about my ability to handle the psychological aspect of taking lives. Miller nodded, appreciating her directness. There's a world of difference between shooting paper targets and shooting people. I understand, sir. Are you confident in your ability to make these shots under these conditions? Morgan didn't hesitate. The conditions are at the edge of what's technically possible. At the planned position, I assess an 85 to 90% probability of success per required shot. And you're comfortable with those odds? I am, sir. The current plan represents the optimal balance of mission effectiveness and team safety. Miller studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. Good, because the alternatives all involve greater risk to the hostages. At 11:55, 5 minutes ahead of schedule, Morgan reached the rocky outcropping that would serve as her shooting position. A natural depression provided concealment, while allowing a clear field of fire toward the compound. Morgan immediately began setting up with practiced precision. Through her spotting scope, she could see the compound in remarkable detail. Guards patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals. No sign of the hostages was visible, confirming intelligence that they were being held underground. At precisely 1200 hours, she made her first communication check. Overwatch in position. All systems operational. Morgan settled into the disciplined patience of a professional sniper. She began noting details that would affect her shooting. The way heat waves shimmered above the flat roofs. The patterns of dust devils indicating wind variations. At 1300 hours, Morgan observed the first signs of the religious festival's impact. Several guards departing in a small convoy headed toward the nearby village, matching intelligence predictions. At 1315, following her final communication check, Morgan began her pre-shooting ritual. Her breathing slowed and deepened, each inhalation and exhalation carefully controlled. Her heart rate dropped as she consciously relaxed muscles that weren't essential. The mental chatter gradually subsided, replaced by crystal clarity that seemed to sharpen her senses. At precisely 1330 hours, Miller's voice came through her earpiece with the single word that would initiate the operation. Execute. Morgan's world narrowed to the view through her scope. The first target, a guard on the eastern watchtower, moved into position as anticipated. She made minute adjustments for wind, distance, and elevation, then drew a slow breath, held it momentarily, and squeezed the trigger with careful, even pressure. The rifle's report seemed disconnected from the action, reaching her ears a fraction of a second after she felt the recoil. Through the scope, she watched the guard collapse instantly. A clean kill. For a brief moment, the reality of what she had just done threatened to break her concentration. She had taken a human life. Someone who had been breathing, thinking, existing moments ago was now gone forever because of her action. The professional discipline ingrained through thousands of hours of training asserted itself immediately. Without allowing herself even a moment to process this first taking of human life, Morgan shifted to the second target. The guard at the main gate never saw or heard anything as her second shot found its mark with the same clinical precision. The operation unfolded with meticulously timed coordination. As Morgan eliminated the perimeter security, Miller's team advanced swiftly toward the compound's vulnerable eastern wall. Then, without warning, the situation changed. A vehicle Morgan didn't recognize approached from the south. A black SUV moving at high speed. Overwatch to extraction leader, she reported calmly. Unexpected vehicle approaching south entrance. 4 armed individuals appears to be security detail. Morgan tracked the vehicle as it approached the compound gates. The driver appeared to be arguing with the remaining gate guard, gesturing emphatically. The gate guard reached for his radio, presumably to request instructions from a superior. That radio call could alert the entire compound to something unusual occurring at the gate. With Miller's team now approaching the hostage location, any heightened security awareness could prove disastrous. Morgan faced a critical decision with no time to request guidance. If she eliminated the gate guard, she would prevent the radio call, but create a new problem. The visitors would immediately recognize something was wrong. If she didn't take the shot, the guard's communication might compromise the extraction team. In that fraction of a second, Morgan made her decision. Instead of targeting the guard, she adjusted her aim and fired at the radio itself. At nearly 600 meters, hitting an object the size of a handheld radio was at the very limit of what was technically possible. The bullet struck the radio just as the guard raised it to his mouth, shattering the device and injuring his hand in the process. Overwatch to extraction leader, Morgan reported. Gate guard attempted radio contact. I disabled the radio. Situation temporarily contained but unstable. Copy, came Miller's terse reply. We've located the hostages. Beginning extraction now. For the next 10 minutes, Morgan divided her attention between tracking the gate guard's movements and maintaining awareness of the extraction team's progress. Then, just as Morgan's scope picked up movement at a side entrance, Miller's team emerging with the hostages, disaster struck. An alarm began blaring throughout the compound. Red lights flashed on the perimeter walls. Guards emerged from barracks and posts, weapons ready. Overwatch, we're compromised, Miller's voice came urgently through the comm. Multiple hostiles converging on our position. We need immediate cover fire to reach extraction point. Morgan's training took over completely. Through her scope, she identified the guards who presented the most immediate threat to the extraction team. In rapid succession, she engaged 5 targets, each shot finding its mark despite the extreme distance and challenging conditions. Overwatch, we can't reach extraction point Alpha, Miller reported. Too many hostiles. Shifting to contingency route Charlie. Need cover on the north wall in 30 seconds. Copy, Morgan acknowledged, already shifting her position. As the team approached the wall, Morgan initiated a precise sequence of suppressing fire that forced hostile gunmen into cover at crucial moments. One by one, the hostages were helped over the wall, followed by the extraction team members. Overwatch, team clear of compound, Miller reported. Moving to secondary extraction point. What's your status? Here was the moment Morgan had been prepared for but hoped wouldn't come. With the team having used the contingency route, her own carefully planned extraction path was no longer viable. Now, she was effectively cut off, with hostile forces between her position and the team's new extraction point. The decision was clear, though not easy. The mission came first. The hostages' safety was paramount. Position compromised, she reported calmly. Hostile forces have identified my location, beginning independent extraction via Route Delta. It wasn't entirely true. Her position hadn't yet been compromised, but she knew it soon would be. By reporting her situation as already compromised, she was ensuring that Miller wouldn't risk the team and hostages by waiting for her or attempting a rescue. Negative, Overwatch, Miller responded immediately. Hold position. We'll send Element to support your extraction. Negative, Morgan countermanded firmly. Hostages are priority. Complete primary mission. I'll rendezvous at emergency extraction point Baker at 1800 hours. Confirmed, Overwatch, he finally responded. Baker at 1800, we'll be waiting. As she prepared to move out, a new sound reached her ears. The distinctive crack of incoming rifle fire. Several rounds impacted the rocks near her position. She had been spotted. Abandoning the remainder of her equipment, Morgan moved rapidly down the backside of the ridge, using natural features for cover as bullets continued to impact around her. For the next hour, Morgan employed every evasion technique she had been taught. She used terrain features to break line of sight, doubled back to confuse pursuers, and moved in unpredictable patterns. The desert heat was brutal, her water supply limited, but her focus remained absolute. Twice she encountered small groups of pursuers, and each time she evaded them by remaining motionless in concealment until they passed. By mid-afternoon, she had put considerable distance between herself and the compound, but she was still deep in hostile territory with several kilometers to go before reaching the extraction point. As she paused briefly in the shadow of a rock formation to check her bearings, Morgan's hand moved to the pocket containing her father's compass. The gesture triggered a memory. Bennett's envelope given to her just before departure with instructions to open it after the mission. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a handwritten note and what appeared to be geographic coordinates. The note read simply, Emma, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong with the primary extraction. These coordinates mark a secondary emergency extraction point known only to myself and Admiral Wilson. A trusted asset will be waiting there until 2100 hours. It's closer than Baker Point and outside the likely search perimeter. Trust your training. Remember what your father taught you. Bennett. Morgan stared at the note, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Bennett had anticipated this scenario, had prepared a contingency unknown to the official mission planners. She checked the coordinates against her map. The location was indeed closer than her currently planned extraction point. More importantly, it would require her to cross less open terrain, reducing her vulnerability to detection. At approximately 1730 hours, Morgan reached a position overlooking the coordinates from Bennett's note. With cautious precision, she surveyed the area through her compact binoculars. The location was a small depression ringed by rock formations, naturally concealed from aerial observation. At precisely 1800 hours, the time she had been scheduled to reach Baker Extraction Point, Morgan heard the faint but unmistakable sound of an approaching helicopter. Not the distinctive thump of a military Black Hawk, but the higher-pitched whine of a civilian model. Morgan remained in concealment, weapon ready. The helicopter, A civilian Bell 407 with no visible markings appeared over the ridge and circled the depression once before beginning a descent. Through her binoculars, Morgan could see a single pilot at the controls, wearing civilian clothes rather than a military flight suit. As the helicopter touched down, the pilot remained at the controls, rotors continuing to spin in what was clearly a hot extraction, ready for immediate departure. Making her decision, Morgan approached the helicopter in a combat crouch, weapon at the ready but not directly aimed at the pilot. As she neared the aircraft, the pilot turned toward her, removing aviation sunglasses to reveal a face she recognized with shock. Robert Bennett himself. Bennett gestured urgently for her to board. No words were exchanged until they had gained altitude and turned westward away from the search area. "Cutting it close, Sergeant," Bennett commented, his eyes remaining fixed on his flight path. "You weren't supposed to be here, sir," Morgan replied, the adrenaline of the past hour still evident in her voice. "The mission plan had a 68% probability of requiring a contingency extraction," Bennett said matter-of-factly. "I don't like those odds when they apply to someone I've invested in." The military transport touched down at Coronado, under a sky washed with the pale light of early morning. As the ramp lowered, Olivia Morgan emerged alongside Robert Bennett, both still wearing the dust of the Syrian-Iraqi border on their tactical clothing. Waiting on the tarmac was Admiral Wilson. "Welcome back, Sergeant Morgan," Wilson greeted her formally. "Glad to see you made it home." "Thank you, sir," Morgan replied, fighting the exhaustion. "Status of the hostages?" A hint of approval flickered in Wilson's eyes at her first question. "All four stable and receiving treatment. They're expected to make full recoveries." When the debriefing concluded, Wilson dismissed the visiting officials and asked Morgan to remain with him and Bennett. Once they were alone, the Admiral's formal demeanor softened slightly. "Off the record, Morgan, how are you really doing?" For a brief moment, the professional facade wavered, revealing the human being behind the operator. "Processing, sir," she admitted. "The technical aspects were as trained. The rest will take time." Wilson nodded with understanding. "That's normal, healthy even." He paused, exchanging glances with Bennett. "There's something else we need to discuss. The success of this operation has significantly accelerated the timeline for Project Artemis. The Pentagon is moving forward with the integration of female operators into special operations units, with you as the proof of concept." Morgan absorbed this information silently. "What this means," Wilson continued, "is that you're being offered an unprecedented opportunity, direct admission to SEAL Team 6, bypassing the remainder of the standard training pipeline." The offer hung in the air. Morgan looked from Wilson to Bennett, then back again. "With respect, sir, I would prefer to complete the standard training program." Wilson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You understand what you're declining?" "I understand, sir, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. But I didn't join this program for special treatment or to be a symbol. I joined to become the best operator I can be through the same process as everyone else." A slow smile spread across Bennett's weathered face. "Told you she'd say that, Jim." Wilson sighed, but there was a hint of admiration in his expression. "Very well, Sergeant. After your recovery period, you'll rejoin the SEAL training program at the appropriate phase. No special treatment, no exceptions." The following 6 months tested Olivia Morgan beyond anything she had experienced before. The infamous Hell Week, 5.5 days of nearly continuous physical exertion, sleep deprivation, and cold water exposure that broke even the toughest candidates, pushed her to the absolute limits of human endurance. As she lay shivering in the freezing surf at 3 a.m., muscles screaming, mind clouded from 96 hours without sleep, a voice inside kept whispering, "You could end this. Just ring the bell." No one would blame you. But each time that voice grew louder, another would answer. Her father's voice telling her stories of the SEALs he'd served alongside, men who never quit, no matter the odds. And beyond that, the memory of those hours in the Syrian desert, where she'd proven to herself what she was truly capable of when lives depended on her focus and skill. Of the 20 candidates who had started the class, only 6 remained by the final day of Hell Week. Morgan was one of them. Her face gaunt from exhaustion, but her eyes still burning with the same quiet determination that had carried her through the Syrian desert. A small private ceremony took place on the same beach where countless SEAL candidates had endured the crucible of Hell Week. Olivia Morgan stood at attention in her dress uniform as Admiral Wilson pinned the coveted SEAL trident to her chest, the first woman in history to earn the prestigious insignia. The ceremony was deliberately kept small and out of the public eye. Present were only the instructors who had overseen her training, Captain Miller representing the operators whose lives she had helped save in Syria, and a small group of fellow candidates who had completed the program alongside her, including Scott Reynolds. "By the authority vested in me by the United States Navy," Wilson intoned formally, "I hereby recognize Special Warfare Operator Morgan as a qualified member of the Naval Special Warfare community." The words were traditional, but their significance was historic. After the ceremony, Reynolds approached Morgan with an extended hand and a genuine smile. "Never thought I'd say this on day one, but you earned that trident more than any of us, Morgan." "We all earned it," she corrected him. "Same standards, same tests." Bennett reached into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. This was meant to be a graduation gift, but it seems appropriate now. Morgan opened the box to find a precision-made challenge coin bearing the SEAL trident on one side and a precision rifle on the other. Around the edge were inscribed the words, "The Last Marksman, First of Many." "It's more than a memento," Bennett explained. "It's a reminder of what you've achieved, but also of the responsibility that comes with being first. There will be others who follow your path, women who look to your example as proof of what's possible." Morgan closed her hand around the coin, feeling its weight and significance. "I understand, sir. I won't let them down." As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting golden light across the beach where so many SEAL candidates had been tested to their limits, Wilson turned to Bennett with a knowing smile. "Well, Bob, still think I was wrong about her?" Bennett shook his head, watching Morgan walk toward her waiting teammates. "I think we were all wrong about something. The question was never whether women could meet the standards. The question was whether we had the wisdom to recognize excellence regardless of where it came from." Wilson nodded, his gaze following the young operator who had shattered preconceptions and redefined possibilities. "She's only just beginning. God help the enemies who underestimate her." Bennett smiled, the expression of a man who had witnessed history unfold and found it good. God help anyone who underestimates what comes next. The barrier isn't just broken, it's gone, and there's no putting it back. The legacy of the last shot had only just begun.